The Fly River cuts through the heart of Papua New Guinea like a slow, dark wound in the earth. It is wide and brown and deceptively still, the kind of river that looks calm from a distance but holds entire worlds beneath its surface. Worlds that are patient, worlds that have been waiting for millions of years. The jungle presses in from both sides, dense and layered and impossibly green, dripping with moisture even in the dry season, alive with the constant noise of insects and birds, calling from canopies so high they disappear into haze. This is one of the least explored and most biologically extraordinary places on the planet. A landscape that has barely changed since the age of the dinosaurs, a place where the rules of survival are written differently, where the water is never just water, and where crossing from one bank to the other can be the last decision a person ever makes. Papua New Guinea sits just north of Australia on the edge of the Pacific's western rim, an island of extraordinary complexity. Its interior highlands are so rugged that dozens of languages developed independently in valleys that never had contact with one another for thousands of years. Its coastline sprawls across both the Coral Sea and the Bismarck Sea, fringed with mangroves and coral and rivers that flood seasonally across vast lowland plains. And threading through all of it, connecting the highlands to the sea, are rivers. Rivers that carry silt from the mountains down to deltas that push constantly into the sea. Rivers that flood their banks and create temporary wetlands teeming with life. Rivers that are the highways of this world, used by local people for transport, for food, for survival. And living in those rivers, hidden in the murky water, lurking beneath overhanging banks and submerged logs, are saltwater crocodiles, the largest reptiles on Earth, animals that have remained essentially unchanged for over 200 million years. They were here before the birds evolved. They were here before the mammals appeared. They watched the dinosaurs come and go and simply continued on, patient and efficient and lethal, perfecting a body plan so effective that evolution saw little reason to alter it. They are the original ambush predators, masters of concealment. Animals that can wait motionless for hours, for days, sometimes for weeks, with barely a ripple to betray their presence, and then explode into motion with a speed that is almost impossible to believe until you have seen it. If you have ever wondered what it is like to be struck by one, to feel those jaws close around you in the brown water of a river in the tropics, then keep watching, because this is a story about exactly that. A story about a man swimming a river crossing in Papua New Guinea on an ordinary day, doing something that people in that part of the world have done for generations, and about the moment when the crocodile hit. And if you want to hear more stories like this one, stories about what happens when human beings cross paths with the most formidable creatures alive, then subscribe now, because there are more coming. His name was Daniel Mundua. He was 26 years old, strong and lean, and comfortable in the water, a man who had grown up beside rivers and knew them the way people who grow up in cities know streets. He knew which currents to respect and which ones could be managed. He knew how to read the surface of moving water, how to pace himself across a wide crossing, how to conserve energy against a current that was always trying to push him downstream. He was not reckless. He was not showing off. He was simply crossing a river that he had crossed many times before, because on the other side there was a village, and in that village there were people he needed to see, and the only way to get there without a 2-hour walk around through jungle was to swim. The crossing was perhaps 80 meters wide at that point. The water was brown and moving at a moderate pace, not the violent rushing torrent of the wet season, but enough to require diagonal swimming, angling your body slightly upstream to account for the drift. The dry season had pulled back the banks and left muddy shelves along the edges, cut through with the deep drag marks of animals coming down to drink. Daniel had looked at the water before he entered it, the way you always do. He had scanned the surface. He had seen nothing. He had waded in. He was roughly halfway across when the world ended. That is the only way to describe it. That is what every survivor of a crocodile attack, who has ever been asked to recount the moment of impact, consistently says. One instant there is only the sensation of swimming, the pull of water, the rhythm of movement, the sounds of the jungle on both banks, and then, without warning, without any sensation of approach or any awareness that something was closing in, there is only violence and noise and the complete dissolution of everything that felt ordinary 1 second before. The crocodile hit him from below and to the left, its jaws closing across his left thigh and hip with a force that compressed bone and tissue and nerve simultaneously. Saltwater crocodiles can generate a bite force of between 3,000 and 5,000 pounds per square inch, depending on the size of the animal. The crocodile that hit Daniel was later estimated based on the wound pattern and the accounts of people who had seen it in that stretch of river before, to be somewhere between 4 and 5 meters in length. A fully mature male. An animal that could weigh as much as 600 kilograms. An animal built entirely around the mechanics of seizing and holding prey. Daniel did not hear the crocodile coming. No one ever does. Saltwater crocodiles approach their prey underwater, swimming with their legs held against their bodies and propelling themselves with lateral sweeps of their powerful tails, barely creating a ripple even at speed. They read water pressure and vibration with sensory cells along their jaws and snouts, called integumentary sense organs, clusters of tiny nerve endings so sensitive they can detect the pressure waves created by a fish moving several meters away. Daniel had been creating vibrations in the water with every stroke for the entire crossing. The crocodile had been tracking him long before he ever felt it. The strike itself is not the most dangerous part of what a saltwater crocodile does to large prey. The bite, as catastrophic as it is only the beginning. What comes next is the death roll. The crocodile, once it has secured a grip, uses the same powerful tail and muscular torso that propel it through the water to spin its entire body in a rapid rotation, wrenching whatever it has caught with a force designed to tear limbs from bodies, to disorient and overwhelm, to prevent any possibility of resistance. It is a technique developed over 200 million years of refinement. It works on wildebeest and buffalo and sharks and people with equal efficiency. When the crocodile death rolled in that brown water, with Daniel Mundua in its jaws, the force of it pulled him under immediately. He described later, in the days when he was able to speak again, lying in a hospital bed with tubes running into his arms and a surgeon's reconstruction of his left thigh beneath the bandages, that he had no memory of a decision to fight. There was no moment of choosing. There was only the overwhelming, all-consuming sensation of being spun underwater in total darkness, with something clamped around the left side of his body, and somewhere beneath the noise and the violence and the suffocating press of water, a part of his mind working very fast and very clearly, focused entirely on not dying. Crocodile attack survivors often report this cognitive clarity with a kind of surprised wonder afterwards. The terror comes later. In the moment itself, something ancestral and enormously powerful takes over in the human brain, a neurological response so ancient it predates conscious thought, flooding the body with adrenaline, narrowing perception down to a single point of focus, suppressing pain signals to a remarkable degree. Daniel later said he felt no pain at all during the attack itself. He felt the pressure, he felt the rotation, he felt the desperate lack of air, but the pain, the extraordinary pain that would consume the following weeks, was entirely absent in those first moments. He drove his right thumb into what he could reach. In the darkness and the churning water, completely disoriented, he could not see anything, but his hand found the crocodile's eye socket and he drove his thumb into it as hard as he could, repeatedly. This is one of the few responses that can cause a crocodile to release its grip, not because it injures them significantly, but because the eye is one of the very few places on a crocodile's body where the armored hide gives way to something soft and sensitive, and the neurological response to that kind of pressure can sometimes, not always, but sometimes, trigger a release. Crocodiles have a third eyelid, a transparent membrane called a nictitating membrane that closes to protect the eye during the death roll, but the socket itself, the soft tissue around it, remains accessible. The crocodile released him, not immediately. The thumb in the eye did not produce an instant and clean escape. What it produced was a fractional relaxation in the grip, a momentary interruption in the rolling motion, a half-second in which the jaws were not locked at full force, and Daniel Mundua, with a combination of desperate strength and the explosive physics of adrenaline, wrenched himself sideways and free. He surfaced in a churning mess of water and blood. He was disoriented, had no idea which direction was which bank, but he was breathing, and breathing was everything. The river around him was visibly red. He could see that clearly even in the brown water. He was losing blood at a rate that he understood dimly, in the part of his brain that was still processing information, was not compatible with a long timeline. He had to get out of the water immediately. He began to swim. He could not feel his left leg in any useful sense. It was there. He could see it moving when he looked down, but it was moving on its own momentum, disconnected from his volition, driven by whatever nerve impulses were still firing through the trauma. His right leg was doing the work. His arms were doing the work. He was swimming diagonally, angling toward the nearer bank without consciously deciding to do it, operating on something more fundamental than conscious thought. Saltwater crocodiles, when prey escapes from a death roll, will often strike again. This is not aggression in the way we understand human aggression. It is simply the completion of a behavioral sequence that has been interrupted. The crocodile had invested energy in the attack, and the prey was still in its environment. But the blood dispersing through the water, the turbulence of Daniel's frantic swimming, and possibly the injury to the eye socket were enough to break the behavioral chain in this instance. The crocodile did not pursue him. Daniel reached the bank. He did not so much climb it as collapse onto it, his hands finding the mud and his body following his hands, and he lay there in the mud of the riverbank in Papua New Guinea, with blood running down through the root systems of the riverbank vegetation and back into the water, staring up at the sky through the canopy, and he was alive. The injuries were severe by any clinical measurement. The crocodile's jaws had closed across the left upper thigh and hip at an angle that created two distinct puncture series, upper and lower, consistent with the tooth arrangement of a large adult saltwater crocodile. The musculature of the upper thigh had been torn and compressed in a pattern that would require multiple reconstructive surgeries. The femur itself, the thigh bone, the largest and strongest bone in the human body, had been fractured. The deep tissue damage extended from the hip joint downward past the knee on the medial surface, and there was significant vascular compromise, meaning the blood supply to the lower leg had been disrupted and would need surgical restoration to prevent the loss of the limb entirely. He had also inhaled water during the rolling and submersion, and the stress on his cardiovascular system was extreme. By the time other people from the village on the far bank, who had seen what happened from a distance and were already in a canoe crossing toward him, reached Daniel, he had lost enough blood that he was struggling to remain conscious. The men who pulled him out of the mud and began the process of binding his wounds with whatever fabric was available, who paddled him back across the river, while one of them held pressure on the wounds with both hands, who then ran with him to the nearest road, were not medical professionals. They were his neighbors. They were the people he had been swimming to visit. Getting Daniel Mundua to hospital took time. This is the reality of geography in rural Papua New Guinea. The nearest facility with a surgeon capable of performing the kind of vascular and orthopedic reconstruction he needed was hours away. The roads were poor. The communication infrastructure was unreliable. One of the men from the village had a mobile phone, but the signal was intermittent. What they could reach was a mission hospital, a small facility with limited resources but dedicated staff, and it was the mission hospital that received Daniel first and began stabilizing him while the process of transferring him to the main facility in the provincial capital was organized. He was in surgery within 4 hours of the attack, which under the circumstances was remarkable. The surgical team that worked on him faced a complex reconstruction. The vascular repair was the priority, because without restoring blood flow to the lower leg could not be saved. They worked for hours. The reconstructive procedure for the muscle and soft tissue was performed in stages over the following days. Daniel Mundua was sedated and attached to monitors and connected to intravenous lines, and he did not see the jungle or the river or the sky for a very long time. Saltwater crocodiles have been living in the rivers and coastal estuaries of Papua New Guinea for so long that the island itself has partly shaped around them. They are apex predators in an ecosystem that has evolved with them at the top of the aquatic food chain, and everything else in those waterways, from the fish to the turtles to the birds that wade in the shallows, exists in some relationship with their presence. The local people of Papua New Guinea have always known this. They have lived alongside saltwater crocodiles for as long as there have been people on the island, and that relationship is complicated and layered and not reducible to simple fear. In many communities along the Sepik River, one of the great river systems of New Guinea that runs roughly parallel to the northern coast for over 1,000 kilometers, the crocodile is a sacred animal. The Sepik peoples have built an entire cosmology around the crocodile, with origin myths in which the world itself was created by a crocodile, in which human beings emerged from the body of a crocodile, in which the crocodile is not merely a predator but an ancestor. The great ceremonial houses of the Sepik, the House Tambaran, the spirit houses that are among the most architecturally distinctive structures in the Pacific, are built in the shape of a crocodile, their peaked rooflines representing the ridge of the animal's spine, their interiors filled with carvings and paintings and objects that invoke the crocodile's power. Young men of the Sepik communities, in initiation ceremonies that have been practiced for generations, undergo a process of ritual scarification in which patterns are cut into the skin of the chest, back, and arms to create raised scars that replicate the pattern of crocodile scales. The ceremony is extraordinarily painful and takes days to complete. The belief is that through this process, the young man takes the crocodile's strength and power into himself, that he becomes partly crocodile, that the boundary between human and animal becomes permeable in a way that confers protection and power. The crocodile is not the enemy. The crocodile is the ancestor. The crocodile is the source. This does not mean the Sepik peoples are indifferent to the danger that crocodiles represent. They are not. They have lost family members to crocodiles. They know exactly what these animals are capable of. The relationship is more nuanced than simple worship or simple fear. It is the relationship of people who have lived alongside an apex predator for thousands of years and have developed, over that time, a deep and specific knowledge of its behavior, its patterns, its preferences, its danger zones and safe zones, its habits and its moods. Knowledge that has been accumulated and refined across generations and passed down through exactly the kind of practical, embedded experience that allows people to live in close proximity to something deadly without being destroyed by it. River crossings are a part of life in Papua New Guinea in a way that is difficult to fully communicate to people who live in landscapes reticulated with bridges and roads. In the rural lowlands, the rivers are the roads. They are how you travel, how you trade, how you visit family in the next village. The river is not an obstacle. It is the route. And crossing it, whether by canoe or on foot through shallows or by swimming, is simply something that people do. It is not considered a feat. It is not considered extraordinary. It is ordinary life in an extraordinary landscape. The knowledge of how to cross a river safely in crocodile country is specific and detailed. You do not cross at dawn or dusk, which are peak feeding times for crocodiles. You do not cross near the mouths of side channels, where crocodiles often rest in ambush. You do not cross where the bank is deeply undercut and shaded, which is prime crocodile resting habitat. You do not cross where there are large concentrations of fish, which means the crocodiles are hunting nearby. You look for signs on the bank, the drag marks, the slides, the disturbed mud. You look at the surface of the water for the characteristic stillness of a submerged crocodile, the way a floating log sits differently in the current than everything else around it. You read the water. But the crocodile is extraordinarily good at not being read. This is its defining evolutionary achievement. Not its speed, not its strength, not even the power of its jaws. Those things are all exceptional, but they are not what makes the saltwater crocodile such an effective predator over 200 million years of continuous operation. What makes it exceptional is its stillness, its patience, its ability to exist in the water without displacing it in any way that registers to a watching eye. A large saltwater crocodile floating with only the top of its head breaking the surface presents a profile in the water no larger than a coconut. In brown, murky water, it presents nothing at all. It is water. It is invisible. Daniel Mundua had crossed that river many times. He had read the water each time. On the day the crocodile hit him, the water told him nothing, because the water told him nothing, because the crocodile is better at hiding than human beings are at looking. This is not a failure of attention, or a failure of knowledge, or a failure of courage. This is the result of 200 million years of predator evolution operating against approximately 300,000 years of human evolution. When those two things meet in a brown river in the tropics, the mathematics are not always favorable to the human. The saltwater crocodile, Crocodilus porosus, is the largest living reptile on Earth. The largest verified specimen was just over 6 meters in length, taken in the Philippines in the early 20th century, and weighed over 1,000 kilograms. Animals of 5 meters are not uncommon in the large river systems of New Guinea, northern Australia, and the islands of Southeast Asia. The species ranges from the east coast of India across Southeast Asia, through the Indonesian archipelago, and into northern Australia and the western Pacific, a distribution that reflects both its tolerance for saltwater, which most crocodilians do not share, and its extraordinary navigational ability in open ocean. Saltwater crocodiles have been documented swimming hundreds of kilometers in open ocean between islands. They use ocean currents as highways, entering the current at river mouths and riding the flow to new habitat. This is how they have colonized islands across the Pacific that would otherwise be inaccessible to large terrestrial predators. It is one of the most remarkable dispersal behaviors of any large reptile, and it has been studied using satellite tagging programs that reveal crocodiles making open ocean journeys of over 900 kilometers in a single movement. They navigate using the Earth's magnetic field, the same mechanism used by many migratory animals, and they can maintain directional swimming in open ocean for days without landfall. This capacity for ocean travel means that rivers in Papua New Guinea are not isolated ecosystems. The crocodiles that live in them are part of a population that exchanges individuals across the Western Pacific, animals that have come from Australia, or from Indonesia, or from the Philippines, that have ridden currents across open water and found their way into river systems that provide the combination of warm water, abundant prey, and suitable nesting habitat that defines optimal saltwater crocodile environment. The Fly River, the Sepik River, the Ramu River, the great lowland waterways of New Guinea, these are among the finest saltwater crocodile habitats on Earth. And the animals that live in them are among the largest of their kind. Crocodiles grow throughout their lives, which can span 60 years or more. The largest animals in a population are therefore the oldest, and the oldest animals have had the most time to accumulate the experience and the behavioral repertoire that makes them effective hunters. A very large crocodile is not just physically more dangerous than a smaller one. It is more experienced, more patient, better at reading its environment, better at timing a strike to exploit the brief window of maximum vulnerability that a swimming human presents. The crocodile that hit Daniel Mundua was, by the estimates of people who knew that stretch of river, an animal that had been living there for a long time. In the weeks following the attack, while Daniel was in hospital undergoing surgeries and fighting infection, and slowly, incrementally beginning the process of recovery, the river went on. The jungle went on, the birds called from the canopy, and the fish moved through the current, and the crocodile lay in its stretch of river, and waited with the patience of something that has never needed to hurry. The river does not mark events. The river simply moves. Daniel Mundua spent 3 months in hospital. The vascular repair to his left leg was successful, meaning the leg was saved, but the reconstruction of the musculature and the healing of the fractured femur were slow and complicated processes. He developed infection twice in the deep tissue, which required additional surgical intervention and extended his recovery timeline significantly. The bite wounds themselves, the punctures made by the teeth of the crocodile, were the least of it. The deep compression injury, the tearing of muscle along the full length of the attack zone, the bone damage, these were the things that took time. He learned to walk again. This sentence contains a great deal of pain and effort and determination that the sentence itself cannot fully hold. He learned to walk again means weeks of physiotherapy in which a leg that had been fundamentally restructured was asked to perform the function it had been built for. Means the relearning of movement patterns that the brain had encoded and then had to recode around new tissue architecture. Means falling and trying again, and falling and trying again. He learned to walk again. By the time he left the hospital, he was walking with a pronounced limp and considerable pain, using a stick. The doctors told him the limp might improve with time and continued physiotherapy. They told him the pain would eventually decrease. They were cautious about the full extent of the long-term prognosis, as medical professionals are required to be. But he was walking, he was alive. The crocodile population of Papua New Guinea is itself a complicated story. The saltwater crocodile was heavily hunted throughout the mid-20th century for its hide, which produces one of the most commercially valuable leathers in the world. By the 1960s and 1970s, populations across the species range had been drastically reduced in many areas, the large animals almost completely removed because the largest hides commanded the highest prices and the largest animals were the most sought after. Papua New Guinea was one of the worst affected regions. The rivers that had been full of very large crocodiles were stripped of the biggest animals within a generation. Then came the shift. Papua New Guinea was among the first countries in the region to develop a sustainable use program for crocodiles, a model in which controlled harvesting of eggs from wild nests, combined with captive rearing and commercial farming, provided economic value for the species that incentivized conservation rather than elimination. Local communities were given rights over the crocodile populations in their traditional lands, which meant that the crocodile transformed from something that competed with local people for resources into something that generated income for them. The skin trade continued, but through a managed, regulated system that maintained wild populations rather than depleting them. The result is that wild saltwater crocodile populations in Papua New Guinea today are substantially recovered compared to their mid-century low point. There are more large crocodiles in the rivers now than there were 40 years ago. This is a conservation success story, and it is genuinely that. A demonstration that economic incentives aligned with ecological reality can reverse the trajectory of a declining population. But it also means that the rivers are more dangerous than they were in living memory for many local communities. The large animals that were hunted out during the intensive harvesting period are back, and large crocodiles are the ones that take people. The tension between the recovery of a predator population and the safety of the human communities that live alongside those predators is not unique to Papua New Guinea or to crocodiles. It is a tension that runs through every human encounter with the recovery of apex predator populations anywhere on Earth, from wolves in Europe to sharks in Australian waters, to tigers in India, to bears in North America. When a predator population recovers, the risk to people in that predator's range changes. This is a biological reality. The question of how to manage that reality, how to maintain the conservation gains while protecting the people who live most directly in contact with the recovered population, is one of the genuinely difficult problems in applied conservation. Papua New Guinea manages it imperfectly, as every country manages it imperfectly, because there is no perfect solution. The crocodile farm system provides economic incentives that support conservation. Education programs attempt to give local communities better information about crocodile behavior and risk reduction. But the rivers are vast and the crocodiles are everywhere, and the people who live along those rivers need to use them to survive, and sometimes the crocodile and the person arrive at the same stretch of water at the same time. The ecology of the Fly River lowlands, where Daniel Mundua was attacked, is itself extraordinary in ways that extend far beyond the crocodile. The Fly River drains one of the largest intact tropical lowland rainforest systems remaining on Earth, a vast wilderness of swamp forest and gallery forest and seasonally inundated grassland that covers millions of hectares and contains species that have not yet been described by science. New species of plants and insects and amphibians are still being found in the lowland forests of southern New Guinea, with a regularity that speaks to just how comprehensively unexplored this landscape remains. The fish diversity in the Fly River system alone is exceptional, with species found nowhere else in the world. The river itself is affected by one of the most significant mining operations in the Western Pacific. The Okateti mine in the upper Fly catchment has been releasing waste material into the river system since the 1980s, with effects on the water chemistry and sedimentation that have been documented and debated and litigated and continue to affect the river ecology downstream. The people who live along the lower Fly have seen changes to the fish populations and the forest along the riverbanks over the decades since the mine began operating. The ecological relationship between the mining operation and the river ecosystem is complex and remains contested. But the river goes on, carrying its brown load of silt and dissolved material to the delta and the Coral Sea. The birds of Papua New Guinea are among the most spectacular on Earth. The island is home to over 40 species of birds of paradise, the males of which have evolved plumage and display behaviors of extraordinary complexity in the context of a mating system where females choose their mates based entirely on the quality of the male's performance. The male birds of paradise invest enormous energy in the development of elaborate feathers and in the behavioral routines that display them, routines that involve specific movements and postures and vocalizations refined over generations of female preference. The result is some of the most visually extraordinary animals on the planet, birds that seem almost impossible, whose plumage appears to exceed any reasonable function, that exist at the boundary of what natural selection seems able to produce. The cassowary, the large flightless bird of the New Guinea and North Queensland rainforests, is a direct descendant of the ancient ratatite lineage, the group that also includes the emu of Australia, the ostrich of Africa, the rhea of South America, and the kiwi of New Zealand, a distribution that reflects the ancient breakup of the southern supercontinent Gondwana and the dispersal of the ratatite ancestors across the separating fragments. The cassowary is the heaviest bird in New Guinea and the third heaviest bird in the world, and it is equipped with a casque on top of its head, whose function is not fully understood, and with a dagger-like inner toe claw that it uses in defense with considerable effectiveness. Cassowaries have killed people. They are treated with respect. In the highlands of Papua New Guinea, at elevations above 1,500 meters, where the air cools and the vegetation changes, and the tree ferns give way to mossy cloud forest, the ecology is different again, separated from the lowlands by altitude barriers as effectively as if by ocean. Species in the highlands have diverged from their lowland relatives over millions of years of isolation on the mountain slopes, producing endemic forms found on single mountain ranges. The diversity of tree kangaroos, large marsupials that have reinvaded the arboreal niche from terrestrial ancestors, is particularly high in the highlands forests, with species occupying specific altitude bands on specific mountain ranges, each adapted to the particular conditions of its narrow vertical range. Papua New Guinea sits at the meeting point of the Australian and Pacific tectonic plates, and this geological restlessness means that the island is volcanically and seismically active in ways that have shaped its ecology repeatedly over geological time. The highlands were uplifted relatively recently in geological terms, and the speed of that uplift created conditions for rapid speciation, as populations were separated by rising ridges and responded to new ecological pressures at different altitudes. The result is a pattern of extraordinary biological diversity concentrated in a relatively small geographic area, with species richness that rivals much larger tropical regions. Daniel Mundua, in the months after his release from hospital, returned to his village on the Fly River. He did not return to the water immediately. This was not fear in any simple sense. He had grown up in the water, beside the water, in a culture and a landscape where the water was fundamental to life. The absence of the water was itself a kind of wound. But the body needs time, and the body tells you what it needs. And what his body was telling him in those first weeks home was that the river would wait. He could watch it from the bank. He did watch it, often, sitting in the shade with his leg out straight, because bending it still produced significant pain, watching the brown surface move. The river does not show you what is in it. That is the nature of the river, a flat brown surface that could be hiding nothing or everything, a surface that gave him nothing on the day the crocodile came up from beneath it and took him, a surface that was the same now as it had been then, indifferent and brown and moving. He talked about it with the older men of the village, men who had their own knowledge of crocodiles and their own experiences of the river's danger, men who had lost family members and friends, men who carried the accumulated wisdom of many generations of life beside these waters. The conversations were not therapeutic in any clinical sense. They were practical. They were about the specific stretch of river where he had been hit, about what the older men knew of that stretch, about where the large crocodiles had been seen before and since, about what the behavior of the river at different seasons meant for the behavior of the crocodiles within it. One of the older men told him something that had been passed down through his own knowledge of the river. He said that in that particular stretch, the bank on the far side, the side Daniel had been swimming toward, had a deep undercut section invisible from the surface, a place where the bank had eroded beneath the waterline over many years, creating a cavity large enough for a large crocodile to rest in complete concealment with its entire body below the surface. You could not see it from either bank. You could not detect it from the surface. The crocodile that had been using that spot had been using it for a long time, coming and going along the river bottom, and people who knew the river well did not cross at that point during certain seasons. This was knowledge that had not been communicated to Daniel explicitly before the attack, because it was the kind of knowledge that was embedded in the behavior of people who had grown up in that specific place, expressed not as a formal warning, but as a habitual avoidance that its holders might not even have been able to articulate as a specific rule. They simply did not cross there. They crossed 50 meters upstream or downstream without knowing precisely why, because their own knowledge of it was so ingrained it had become unconscious. Daniel had crossed there because he had not grown up in that exact section of river. He had known the river broadly. He had not known that crossing specifically. This is one of the ways traditional ecological knowledge works, and one of the ways it can fail to protect people. When it is transmitted completely, embedded in practice and place and habit, it is extraordinarily effective. People who grow up entirely within its framework, who learn the river the way they learn language, absorbed rather than taught explicitly, carry a detailed map of its dangers that is genuinely protective. But the map has gaps for people who are adjacent to it rather than fully within it. It has gaps when people move between different stretches of river. It has gaps when populations move and traditional use patterns shift. It has gaps when the crocodile population changes, when animals move into new territories or grow large enough to shift their behavior. The crocodile that hit Daniel Mundua may have been in that stretch of river for years, or it may have moved into that habitat relatively recently. Large male saltwater crocodiles establish and defend territories, and the range of a large male can cover many kilometers of river. They are not always in the same spot. They move, they follow prey, they shift with the seasons. The undercut bank that the old man described was a resting place, a place the crocodile used when it was in that part of its range, which was not always. The timing of Daniel's crossing coincided with the crocodile's presence in that specific location at that specific moment, and the crocodile read the vibrations in the water of a large animal swimming across its territory, and it did what saltwater crocodiles do. The saltwater crocodile's sensory system is among the most sophisticated of any predatory reptile. Beyond the pressure-sensitive and tegumentary sense organs on the jaws, the crocodile has excellent vision both above and below water, capable of detecting movement at considerable distances. Its hearing is acute, far more developed than that of most other reptiles, and it can detect low-frequency vibrations through the water and through the ground using bones in its jaw and skull that conduct sound directly to the inner ear. It can smell blood in the water at concentrations so low they are undetectable by human instruments. It can regulate its body temperature with precision by behavioral means, emerging from the water to bask and returning to cool, choosing water temperatures that optimize its metabolic efficiency for hunting. The combination of these sensory capabilities with the extraordinary physical efficiency of its body, the hydrodynamic profile, the explosive burst swimming speed that can exceed 30 kilometers per hour for short distances, the jaws producing force that no terrestrial animal can match, makes the saltwater crocodile in its aquatic habitat one of the most complete predators that has ever evolved on this planet. In the water, in the brown rivers of New Guinea, it has no peer. Nothing that swims in those rivers can outrun it. Nothing that enters those rivers from the bank can outmaneuver it. It is at the absolute apex of its ecosystem, occupying a position it has held, essentially unchanged, for longer than most of what we consider ancient. A saltwater crocodile's digestive system reflects this efficiency. The stomach acid of a crocodile is among the most acidic of any vertebrate, capable of dissolving bone, horn, and shell entirely. This is not incidental. Crocodiles are opportunistic predators that take whole prey and need to extract maximum nutritional value from everything they consume. The slow metabolic rate that characterizes reptiles means that a large crocodile can survive for many months without eating, drawing on stored energy with a physiological efficiency that no warm-blooded animal can match. In times of food scarcity, the crocodile simply waits, and in times of abundance, it feeds heavily and stores the surplus. This metabolic flexibility is part of what has made the crocodilian lineage one of the most durable on Earth. Nesting behavior in saltwater crocodiles is another dimension of their sophistication. The female builds a mound nest from vegetation and soil along the bank, and she guards it for the full 3-month incubation period with remarkable dedication. The temperature inside the nest determines the sex of the hatchlings, with middle temperature ranges producing males and higher and lower temperatures producing females, a mechanism called temperature-dependent sex determination that is shared with other reptiles and with the ancestors of birds. When the eggs are ready to hatch, the hatchlings begin calling from inside the eggs, and the mother excavates the nest and carries the hatchlings to the water in her mouth. One of the most striking behavioral juxtapositions in the animal kingdom. The deadliest jaws on